Compared to the previous episode I did, I kind of think about the stuff I'm supposed to be talking about on this episode, and it kind of feels a bit easy. Just mostly because it's stuff that I'm used to talking about, but also, like, the theme is pretty central. There's not too much deviation, and for the most part, it's about dating. Although, interestingly enough, somewhere along the line, someone brings out the term Cishet, which is a term that I have only heard woke people and members of the LGBTQ use to just sort of take a dump on dudes, which means that I'll probably be addressing some woke-ish person discussing some shit about dudes. But before I can get into that, I want to start things off by making you guys just a little bit hard, or at least some of you a little bit hard. Now, apparently, a bite from a Brazilian spider can cause 4-hour-long erections, alright? That's a fun fact. I kind of stumbled upon it. Now, I have the caption here, which says, and I quote, "Scientists are studying a component of the venom known as TX2-6 for use in treating erectile dysfunction. According to a 2007 report by Life Science, a Brazilian wandering spider's venom stimulates a painful 4-hour-long erection. The venom boasts of nitric oxide, a chemical that increases blood flow." End quote. Now, when I kind of saw this story, much as, it sounded like it would be an interesting thing to talk about, at the same time, I feel like this isn't the first time I've heard of a spider's venom or a spider's bite causing erections. Because I've also heard that there's, I don't know if it's called like a banana spider, which causes like an 8-hour erection or some shit. But either way, we're not trying to compare how long the erections come in, because I feel like the whole talking about the erections from a guy's perspective is probably a little overused. Because I can go into the whole, if you could give some of this venom to the older dudes instead of the blue pill, then you would save some of them from dying and some of them from having heart attacks and shit. Hell, even some young dudes have fallen into that trap of taking some Viagra-like pill, and then they end up having some sort of a heart condition as a result of it. Like, yeah, I could probably save them and shit, and that all sounds fine and dandy. But the thing that I actually thought about when I was reading this, after, avoiding all the guy talk for a little bit, is if we would find one that's beneficial to women, or, if this one was also beneficial to women, in that it was also a sexually enhancing, sort of substance that affects women as well. Because usually we just hear these spiders biting niggas. I don't know if they bite the dick so that niggas get hard and shit, but if that would happen, that would be a very interesting story to find out. But all in all, most times we usually just hear about it from, it can give a guy an erection for hours. I'm more curious if it can give a woman a hard-on, more or less, for, roughly about the same kind of time periods, like make their nipples hard and shit, so that, when she's busy walking outside of the house, hasn't worn a bra and all of a sudden you can see her cross-eyed nipples and you don't even know which one to focus on. But, you can see it and you can see that she's ready to go. Or, the other alternative being that, if she sees a guy she likes and she gets super horny with that dude, then, she starts shedding off a little bit of that water. So, when you're going to throw some risk to your colleague at work who's been bitten by that spider, all of a sudden you see her getting wet and you just know at that point in time that you have a shot. Like, such things would make it so much easier for guys who don't know if a baby's interested in them. But, the last time I checked on some sort of sex-enhancing substance for women, it was busy talking about how women were shagging for like an entire weekend non-stop. So maybe I shouldn't be looking so far into this thing, and I should just start the podcast in a much nicer way, probably with a new intro that, sounds a little bit shorter but could be just a little bit sweeter. So let's hear it.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Break Time Podcast, a podcast where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective. And, talk about a bunch of other shit from a guy's perspective. The man on the mic is a man who believes that hard-ons should not last very long, because in as much as hard times don't last, hard people do. But still, at the end of the day, it's not like hard-ons are supposed to be for either one of those two. Like, they weren't involved in that shit. He's a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. And I'm glad that we're back, and I'm glad that, we've made a couple of changes that hopefully should make things better. All in all, if you listened before Break Time on Westside changed its name, then thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. And if you're a new listener, thank you for listening, and I hope you continue listening to this podcast. Now, with that said, because this is a Friday episode, I usually like to dive into Twitter, look at a couple of the tweets, break them down, see what it is that can be said. The drill to how you can contribute certain tweets so that I can address them is pretty simple, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or if it ended up as a reel, then on IG, the place to send it to is the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, you can send it to the Breaktime Podcast, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, with that said, I do have a couple of tweets that I need to get into, but before I can get into that, I do need to address a bit of a situation. Now, if you spent a bunch of time on the relationship-y side of the internet over the past 1-2 months, you've probably noticed that a lot of people have been talking about dating and going on dates and places that you should go for dates and certain behaviors that you're supposed to have when you go for a date. Now, of course, a lot of those pieces of advice, a lot of those opinions have come under scrutiny, and they have annoyed some people, triggered others, and made some people just feel like the dating market isn't really worth it. Now, a video that was posted up on, I think it was TikTok or on IG sometime last month, did kind of bring up some of those feelings, and it was a woman who was busy talking about her biggest dating pet peeve when dating men, and she said a couple of 2-3 interesting things that I feel probably should be discussed, so I am going to let the clip of her saying everything just play so that I can get into my thoughts on the entire thing. So, without further ado,
my biggest dating pet peeves, and in my experience, it almost always happens when I date dudes. Not to say that women can't do it too, but in my experience, it's usually the cishet dudes. So I was on a date with this guy, really handsome, probably too handsome, which should have been a red flag, honestly. And he just yacked about himself. Didn't ask me any questions. I was yes-anding. I was following up. I was doing all the good dating things like be interested, not interesting, even though I'm very interesting. So we went on the date. We're getting to like an hour, which is usually when I feel like, okay, I can wrap this up. I can leave. And so I say, well, I have to go because I actually am catching a flight tomorrow, which was true. And he says, oh, you're catching a flight. Where are you going? I was still living in New York at the time. And I said, oh, I'm going to LA tomorrow. And he was like, really? Why are you going to LA? And I said, oh, well, I sold a television show. And so I've got some meetings and I'm doing like a work session with my producers. And he was like, wow, you work in TV? It's like, yep, this was fun, bye. He didn't know anything about what it was that I did. And he was like, wait, when can I see you again? And I was like, this wasn't good. Never. Oh my God. Oh God.
okay. So I have a couple of thoughts about this and I am going to get into them in a little bit. But first of all, I want to start by just asking the women who are listening to this podcast to just answer this out for me, because I honestly just can't understand it. Like, when the fuck did being a very good looking guy become a red flag? Like, I don't get that shit, because like, y'all say that you want a good looking dude. You want your Prince Charming to be fine. That's the shit that y'all have been saying since day one. How the hell did it suddenly turn into we don't want very good looking dudes? Like, the fact that she's bringing it up as a red flag, like, that shit's wild. That shit is honestly quite wild. And personally, I am going to take it under the assumption that a lot of these women who look at a very good looking guy as a red flag probably have been giving it up to very good looking guys in the past before, and when they realize that these dudes have a shit ton of options and they're not going to be the only one, or this guy probably won't want to commit to them, suddenly they get all cold and pissed off because they weren't the chosen ones for these dudes, and then they suddenly all decided, you know what, fuck it, let's make it a red flag because good looking dudes just aren't going to settle down with you or some shit like that. But either way, like, that shit was very, very wild for me. That, and also the whole cishet dudes thing. Because normally I never hear that term unless it's just some derogatory shit about straight men that's going to come out. But all in all, with that said, I think the biggest wild side out of this entire thing is the fact that this babe is blaming a dude for doing something that she pretty much orchestrated the entire time. Like, just get with me on this one for a little bit. Like, you think about it. This babe goes on a date with a dude, asks this dude what he does, and then asks follow-up questions on, the stuff that he does. So this guy practically gets to talk about himself for an entire hour. And then she suddenly gets pissed off because this guy didn't ask her anything about herself, and then gets up to leave just when this guy is starting to get to know her side, and then claims that the date was shit. Like, I don't know if it's just me, but it's like this babe was practically just engineering her own downfall the entire fucking time. Like, how is it that you ask question after question? You ask for follow-up questions because you're supposedly interested in what this guy does, and then you get pissed off because he hasn't asked you because you are asking follow-up questions about him. Like, I don't know. Maybe this one's just a me thing. Maybe this is just a guy issue that, I'm noticing because I'm a guy. But all of this just sounds like a pack of bull. Dude was pretty much doing what he was being asked to do the entire time, and the babe got pissed off because what? He didn't get to a point and be like, all right, sorry, let me not talk about what it is that I do. What exactly do you do? Because now at that point, the guy could also be ruled out for being dismissive and, suddenly asking what he wants to ask, not what she wants answered. Like, at the end of the day, you could blame the dude for being self-absorbed, but the only reason he's self-absorbed is because you asked questions that made him seem self-absorbed. So all in all, I feel like there's nothing wrong with what this guy did, and whatever it is that she's calling a pet peeve at this point in time, whether it's valid or not, it's based off of a bullshit situation that she's giving us. Like, she let the guy in with the questions, created the problem for herself, and then suddenly got pissed off and decided to leave after creating a problem of her own. Like, at the end of the day, she's just taking a dump on a good-looking guy for being good-looking and doing whatever the hell it is that she had asked him to do, which in and of itself is beyond his control and totally of her own making. So in this particular case, I don't know. This is one of the reasons why a lot of guys don't like dates nowadays. There's a bunch of women that are too judgy about stupid bullshit. But either way, all that to say, there's nothing wrong with you being a good-looking dude if you are. And I will leave it at that because I have a bunch of tweets to get into. So, moving it on to the tweets. Now, I stumbled upon a tweet which I saw, was worth discussing. But there was a quote tweet right next to it that was almost a reverse of it that I feel is almost worth discussing. So, the original tweet said, and I quote, "When you have money as a woman, no matter how small it is, that's when you realize that men have so much more to offer rather than just money." End quote. Now, when I saw this tweet, I didn't really think too much of it initially, but there was a Reddit post that I read a couple of days ago, which I may turn into an episode, in the very near future, which had this lady talking about how she got this new job where she's making a lot more money and the different kind of changes that it's had in her life. How family members are giving her a little bit more respect, they're talking to her a little bit nicer, she's meeting a different set of people and everything. And I can remember there was a comment where a guy came up and was like, "Oh, your dating pool is going to shrink, blah blah, or you're not going to find a good man because there's not that many men that are higher up than you." And she sort of just replied by saying that now that I've moved to this position, I have even more options in guys. I'm meeting more guys. There's guys that are gifting me with chocolates and, other gifts and shit. And there's like no certain expectation with everything. And a bunch of these guys are really, really nice. And when I kind of read that, it did kind of resonate something for me for a little bit, because one of the things that I guess I've realized after being friends with people that make, quite a bit more money, both male and female, that is, you sort of start to see that once you take money itself out of the equation, there's a lot of great experiences that you can get from people. And of course, when you have money, you have access to those great experiences. So if you're a babe and you started making money, so money itself isn't really a problem for you, when you start meeting guys, a lot of the guys that you will meet, a lot of the guys that you will interact with who don't also look at money as this end all be all and, focus on enjoying life with what you've got, will pretty much be focusing on experiences. They'll be pretty much focusing on trying new things out and everything. And you'll sort of start to see the better side of life with such guys. Like, I'll give you a particularly good example. So last year around my birthday, a very close friend of mine called Josh took me for indoor golfing. Now, I never knew that indoor golf existed, and I would have never thought that we have a place with indoor golfing in Nairobi. Mostly because I'm not searching for that shit, and mostly also because I don't really think too much about stuff like that. But being exposed to, having a friendship with someone like Josh kind of opened me to that. And with a lot of women, that's kind of the same thing that they'll sort of find once they start dating such guys. Now, of course, it's not like I'm dating my friend Josh, but it's a pretty clear example that there's a lot of fun activities that you can do when you have money. And up until you start interacting with people who have money, who've had those experiences, you probably won't be doing them yourself. You probably won't be thinking of doing them yourself up until you get to a point where that's actually a possibility. So whatever the hell this woman said, I totally resonate with it. But on the quoted retweets, there was actually a flip side to it, and it was given by a woman, interestingly enough, and it was the opposite of what this woman was actually saying. So what this woman said, and I quote, "When you have money as a lady, no matter how small it is, that's when you realize that men have nothing to offer apart from money." End quote. Now, when I read this, after reading the original tweet itself, I didn't feel like it was really worth something to, make too much noise about, because for the most part, I think there's a lot of guys that'll admit that this is true, and there's even more women who'll admit that this is true. Like, when you kind of think about it, this is a very true statement, and there are a lot of guys that will, sort of be examples of this statement being true. But whether you like it or you don't, in as much as babes might complain about this entire thing, a good chunk of this problem, if you can actually call it a problem, is the women themselves. Like, the female gender is responsible for this problem just as much as they complain about it. And I know there's someone who's like, how, but it's the men that do this, blah, blah, creativity, blah, blah. But to be very honest, like, this isn't something that you can entirely blame on the men. And I'll give you a particularly good example. If you check with your fathers, and for some of you even your grandfathers, and you ask them about their time dating, your current mother or grandmother in some cases, like, they will tell you about how they would go with her to certain fun places that were considered fun for their crowd of people at that particular time with whatever budget they had. So whether it was going to Huru Park, whether it was going to a club or a disco as they used to call it, whether it was going to a particular place for eating or drinking that was very synonymous with why you take a babe out for a date in whatever town or city or country they were in, they were probably doing that at that time. So you might even look at some of them right now as the most unromantic people on planet Earth, but a lot of them actually did that. They actually did that exact same thing. But when you look at babes today and the guys that are taking them out, some of them are calling them to the club, or at least to a popular joint where guys are watching football, and she's going to be among his friends when they're busy watching a football match or some shit. Or they'll be meeting up at the club on a Friday night or some shit when everyone has gone out for drinks. Like, at the end of the day, it seems like it lacks creativity. It seems like this guy pretty much just decided to string you along with whatever plans he had for that weekend. But guess what? A good chunk of that problem is as a result of dudes realizing that a lot of babes out here today, in this day and age, are willing to take whatever low quality BS they'll offer as long as they know that this dude has stacks. Like, there's a lot of women out here that are willing to deal with that because they know this guy has money. So if you're a guy and you know that you have money and you know that you don't have to spend a lot, you know that you don't have to get out of your comfort zone and work on your social skills so that you can maintain conversation during a date, if you don't feel like taking a babe out for drinks and food that you don't like at a place that you probably don't even know, and spend money that you didn't even want to spend on food and drinks like that, then you'll end up doing some low quality BS like that, and you know that you'll get away with it because you know the babe already has some idea that you've got stacks, and they are willing to take whatever it is that you're throwing at them because they know that you have stacks, and that's what they're more interested in. So at the end of the day, it's not like the problem itself is just the guys, it's a lot of the women that tolerate that shit. If women in general stopped tolerating that, then the guys would definitely follow suit and actually put some effort into these dates. Like, at the end of the day, majority of the date being a date involves us trying to impress the woman and get her interested. That's like 80% of like making the entire date work. The other 20% is just you looking good enough and ensuring that, you know, you can bag the babe. Like, getting the babe interested is like 80% of that shit. So if you can do that with very minimal effort, very low levels of creativity, and mostly just, you know, integrating it with a guy's chill out, then guess what the fuck most of these guys are gonna do? So if a majority of you women can stop prioritizing the fact that dude has money and prioritize whatever experience he's going to give you, then maybe, just maybe, most of these guys might actually switch up and try upping their creativity when they're working on taking a babe out on a date. Although, then again, I might be wrong about that shit, but either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our final tweet of this episode. So, the next tweet says, and I quote, "What's an unpopular opinion about dating that will have you like this?" And by like this, I mean, you know, everyone sort of turning against you with swords and shit. So, the person who quote retweeted this said, and I quote, "Dating without the intention to get married is a total waste of time." End quote. Now, hearing that, seeing that tweet, I think does bring up the question, is dating without the intention of getting married a good idea or a bad idea? Personally, okay, I think for quite a number of people, it might seem like it's a bad idea, but personally speaking, at least, you know, from the experiences I've seen, it's still a good idea. It's actually not a waste of time when you kind of think about it, because if you look at a majority of the relationships that have turned into, you know, marriages today, it's not like all of them were as a result of the guy saying, I am going out there to date this chick, or I'm going to date this chick because I want to marry her. There's a lot of guys that started just by dating the shorty because they were interested in the babe and they wanted to see how far shit goes. There's guys that were totally in love with this woman, and there are guys that were totally in love with the woman that they were with at the time, and they decided, you know what, I want to be with you. They weren't thinking about tomorrow, the future, or anything. They just wanted to date the woman. Eventually, a couple of years later, you know, they decide to make the relationship serious. They get married, have a couple of kids. All right. There's a lot of guys that got into a relationship that started off as a friends with benefits. Like, they got into a relationship and that relationship was properly solid, and they looked at it, they were like, this babe is worth wifing, and they decided to wife the babe. Hell, some dudes didn't even plan to wife the babe. Like, it was just a situation of they noticed a couple of things and they're like, you know what, this babe could probably make for a good wife to me. And they just ended up making that jump, and, you know, they skipped a bunch of that shit. Like, not everyone is going through the whole intentional, let me go and date out here because I want to get married, or I'm looking for a woman or a man that I can get into some sort of courtship with, and then I can get married to them. Like, even courtship itself as a term, it's not used today, mostly because I think a lot of people think it sounds too serious. And, you know, for the most part, it's been replaced with relationship, and more so, getting serious in the relationship, or a serious relationship. That's pretty much what courtship is nowadays. So to think that people have to get to that point of, I want to date someone that I'm going to date seriously and marry, and then look at all the other ones as bullshit, is like writing off some good possible story starts simply because the end goal hasn't been determined. Like, at the end of the day, there's a lot of not so serious relationships that become serious and lead to marriage and have people living their happily ever afters without really, you know, making this initial decision of, I am going to date this chick so that I can marry her. Like, at the end of the day, sometimes you don't really plan the journey out, but the journey just takes you in a good direction. So I don't think that you dating without the intention of marrying is a bad idea. But if you're dating someone and you know very well that you would never spend the rest of your life with that person, come rain, come sunshine, then maybe, just maybe, you might be wasting someone's time. All in all, I might be wrong about any or all of these tweets, but either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on X or Twitter. It is at BagakaTheD. On Facebook, it is at The Break Time Podcast, and on IG, it is at The Break Time _podcast. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.